Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the September FMDiSC meeting, FileMaker developers in Southern California. We've got some great stuff for you today. I'm Bob Shockey. I'm this month's host. And a little bit later, we're going to have Chris Jackson with a multilingual database case study, as well as our own board member, Chris Moyer, and his always excellent text news roundup. But first, we'll be kicking off with Kevin Frank and a really informative dive into JSONQuery. Before that, if you have any announcements, you can share those after the break. And if you haven't checked out the FMDiSC YouTube channel, remember that anything you miss from today's or any other meeting is recorded there. And lastly, and starting now, please mute yourself during the presentations to avoid interruptions. So I'd like to introduce Kevin Frank. He is the author of the excellent FileMaker Hacks site. And he's going to be talking today about JSONQuery. Kevin, you can take it away whenever you want.
Sure. Bob, did we get that poll together that we were talking about?
Oh, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, let me see if I can bring that up. I did put it together for you, and I'm launching it now. So if you could please answer the poll questions. Everybody see that on your screen? Yeah.
Not at the moment, Bob.
Oh, I
You're
do.
not seeing it? Okay.
I see it.
It's a second pop-up window, so maybe check behind your main Zoom window, Lynn.
Okay, should we declare a victory on that? Is the poll showing up for the people that are going to be watching this later if they watch the recording?
I believe so.
Okay. All right. So it looks like we've got 5% of people using JSONQuery regularly, 35% using it occasionally, 35% have read about it but haven't used it, and 25% none of the above.
And there were, it was just a one question poll, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So I'll click end poll.
Okay.
All right. And I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. Everyone see that?
Yes.
See it.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's go back here for a sec. So we're going to talk about a custom function called JSONQuery. And I'm the presenter. The author is Steve Senft-Herrera. And it actually went live, version 2, officially released about 12 hours ago. So there's the GitHub address, which I'm also going to show again at the end of the slideshow. So a little bit about me, Kevin Frank, been doing FileMaker since I was 2 years old, and technical lead on Codence's Genesis Transactions product. I have a blog, probably a lot of you have heard of it. We have a number of JSONQuery resources already on FileMaker Hacks, and more soon to come. So what is JSONQuery? It's a custom function which operates on JSON. I'm going to bang through these slides really quickly. I promise most of the presentation is not slides. And it's authored by Steve Senft-Herrera at Beeswax. There's Steve, and there's some more Steve. With JSONQuery, the sweet spot is you pointed at an array of objects, and you often think of this as a found set of records where each object would be a record. Or maybe you've got an array of arrays. And that's not the only way you can use it, but that is the sweet spot for JSONQuery, is to analyze that sort of structure. And for example, as some of you know, FileMaker is really good at letting us extract a row from an array, which is just using JSON getElement. But they don't give us a corresponding function to extract a column. But JSONQuery is quite happy to help you with that. So 3 things it does: it queries, does aggregates, does transformations. We're going to see examples of all of these. I was not sure we were going to be live 12 hours ago, so I'm referring to this as the upcoming V2, but it is now live. So I have a few goals for today. Just show some of the depth and breadth of what it can do. Be fast-paced, just focus on what it can do, but not how it does it. Yeah, so just an overview. But if you have questions, please ask. And moderators, please, if I'm ignoring the question, please draw my attention to it. So, pizza cutter is a good metaphor for JSON query, and we'll get into what we mean by that in just a moment. And there again is the GitHub address. So what I'm going to do first is just show some examples, and then I'm going to get into the demo file that accompanies the official demo file that accompanies JSON query. But I just want to show a few examples, bang through these pretty quickly. And so here you'll just see in the bottom left corner, we've got some sample data. It'll change based on example, but over here, I'm sort of telling you what I'm trying to do. So in this case, I've got this list from restcountries.com of all the country entities in the world and a whole bunch of information about them. But in this case, I'd just like to pull out the name of the country. So I'd like to reach in here and say, hey, give me all the names from here. And so click refresh, and it's now done exactly that. Standard for JSON query would be to return things in an array, because you may get one, you may get many. In some cases, it'll give you other output. Maybe instead of an array, I'd like a list. In that case, we could do that. Yeah, here's an example with the pizza cutter. We're going to use, pizza cutters are very handy tools, but you typically have to use them more than once to get your job done. So what we're going to do here is I have a challenge, and this is a two-part example. My challenge is return the URLs that represent the minimum value for this number. Okay. Well, I don't necessarily know what that minimum value is. So first, I'm going to figure out what the smallest value is. So I just said, give me the minimum value at array position 1. Of course, it's a zero-based array, so that's position 1 there. So it went through there and it found the 12, and it says 12 is your minimum value, which coincidentally, we have one of them there. So now what I want to do is I want to bring back all the URLs that match that 12, but I didn't necessarily know it was 12. So the first thing I do is ask the question that we just asked. And then I use that and I feed that value right there. And it brings me back the 2 URLs that match 12. One of them you can see here, the other one you can take my word for. Okay, so we've got the data API maybe, and I think a lot of people got more interested in the in JSON query when we got the execute FileMaker data API script step. But we get this data back. It sounds like, okay, what am I going to do with it now that I've got it back? Well, one thing we could do is to extract just what we want using JSON query. So in this case, as you recall, I said the sweet spot, right? We want an array of objects or an array of arrays. So we care about the data. We don't care about this other stuff here. We want to just get down into the data array. Okay, so I've told, in this case, I'm not even using JSON query, but I'm just using JSON get element to isolate that. So now I've got the data array. So over here in step 2, right, now I'll tell JSON query, hey, find me Cabernet in the products description and bring me back this value called the ID from field data. Okay, so bring back the IDs of entries that have Cabernet. And it's quite happy to do that. And if I were to come over here and say in the current record and in the current field, find that. And then if we scrolled down, we would find some Cabernet in here somewhere. Okay, so, all right, moving along. So I showed that array example, or a teaser for it in the slideshow. And so here we go. Okay, and what I'm saying is, give me the values in the column for array position 4, which is this one, 15, 25, 35, 45, 55. So I click that, and sure enough, it's now returned to me that because I told it I wanted to match all on array position 4. And I don't need to specify the brackets around it. So just, this is the same example, but I'm just pointing that out. Can do the same thing that way. Maybe I'd rather have a list rather than an array. There it is. So, so of course we can do more interesting things than just that. So in this case, I've got these various URLs and some values, and I just want to do some statistics on it, aggregate various ways. So just a quick analysis of what we've got here using JSONQuery. You can see its syntax is pretty much identical, except out here on the 6th argument, I'm doing different things. And of course, the 1 is the array position. Not sure why. Oh, this is just me pointing out that we can do a trick with num to JText. Notice how we have 1,000 separators, and we didn't in the previous example. If you ever need to push a number as part of a text string and you want to get your 1,000 separators in there, you can use num to JText to do it, and it's 1, 0 is the trick. Case insensitive array. Find me, or insensitive queries. Case insensitive. Yep, insensitivity. Got it. All right. So got the U, lowercase, but doesn't matter because it's case insensitive. And I just did a little analysis here. Brought them back if they had an uppercase or a lowercase. But maybe I want to do it case sensitive instead. So in this case, I just asked for lowercase u's only. So now that's what we're getting here. You can see them. Let's see. What's the difference between this one and this one? Give me a, list it. Before we got the array. Now I'm saying I want to list instead. That's what we're doing. Matching values. This time I just got the values. So the difference there was I listed column 0. And now here I'm listing column 1. That's what's happening there. This is a fun one. Actually, Steve cooked up this example. And so we have, imagine a festival, and we've got several festivals in here. And then we've got the stages and the sets and who the bands are and who the musicians are and what instruments they play. So it's pretty complex JSON. In this case, simple thing, just give me how many festivals do I have in here? What are they? So I'm bringing that back. So we've got 3 festivals. And what are we going to do? Well, I'm really into the triangle. And I want to know which bands have triangles. We've got 2. Maybe I'd rather find out about trumpet. So there we go, including O'Reilly LLC band. Sure enough, there it is. Okay. So this was interesting. So now, so far, this is actually came from a real world example. I've been working with the web scraper and getting data back from this person whose profession is to scrape websites and get you the data. And ideally, I would get a date, but sometimes the date was polluted. And so we would define a polluted date as containing a space character, and typically because it had a text string in it. So what I did here was I said, look down into the departures and tell me if it contains a space. And if so, return that field, return the date field. so I can see what the garbage is. Okay, so sure enough, here, there's an example of some garbage. Okay. So maybe, okay, that's all well and good that I've seen it, but maybe I'm going to now have to roll through here and fix it. So of course I could use a while loop and just iterate through them, right? I could go, then I'd iterate through all of them and test each one and see if it needed to get fixed. But what I could do also is have JSONQuery give me the path to the problem entries. So I'm asking the same question, but I'm just going to say, give me the path. So now I know exactly where those problem entries are, and I can tell my script, hey, these are the addresses where you need to go fix it. Or maybe it's not even an address. It could just be a while statement. Could fix it in the data viewer. Okay. So I said I was working with a web scraper, and there are various creative ways that he sometimes doesn't give me what he should be giving me. So what I did was when I get the JSON from him, I put together this and just asked, I don't know, a dozen different questions to test. So I'm going to click refresh here. And what I want to see is an empty array. If any of these arrays aren't empty, that will give me the location of where the problem is. So an example of something that might have a problem. In this case, clicking refresh, and so it's saying, okay, you got an empty departure at array, position 1. Key is missing. Here's one, Tor URL, no key at position 12. Right. So what that means is quite literally, the entire key is missing. Not that the key is there, but the value is empty, but the key isn't even there. Right. So we identified that as 12. So now, of course, it's easy enough to pull it out, take a look at it. Sure enough, no Tor URL at position 12. And just a couple more examples, and then we'll do something else. So, oh, but here's another way I could have asked that question, right? I could have said, omit the entries where the Tor URL path exists. By the way, for people who have been using JSONQuery for a while, this is one of the new operators. So we can now ask the question, but say omit and get the inverse of what we asked. So I'm basically saying, bring me back the entries and omit the ones where the path exists. So now I get the one where Tor URL path does not exist. And, oh, okay, this is a fun one. So we have a set of events from this source. And there's 8,000, almost 8,900. So close to 9,000 entries in here. So this is not trivial. This is not trivial, right? And I want to know which events have an earthquake. So I just said, show me ones where the description contains the earthquake. And now I just got back the ones that do. I think I could instead, I'm going to go out on a limb and try to wing this. I think I could do that if I want to know how many there are. Yeah, 114. Okay. Refresh. So that was the first example. And instead we could get the path. Okay, what are the addresses of those guys? So now that's the target if I wanted to go find those and maybe transform them in some way. So the key thing here where this is interesting is if you have a large amount of JSON and you need to do a relatively small amount of adjustments within it, you can oftentimes get the addresses directly of where you're going to need to go to make the transformation on that particular entry, rather than having to iterate through all of it and test each one. We're going to look at some more examples later, but I want to move on to a couple things here. So just minimize that. We'll come back to that. And one of the things I want to do, so let's see if we got that. Yeah, so here's the GitHub page. for JSONQuery, and 10 hours ago. Okay, and then on FileMaker Hacks, Steve and I did 2 extensive interviews almost 3 years ago on the version 1 of JSONQuery, and there's a version 2 is a superset of version 1, so virtually everything that was in version 1, with very few exceptions, is also in version 2. So these are available for you to look at, should you be so inclined, and really in depth, really in depth. But let's pivot over and take a look at the file that you get when you download JSONQuery. So when you open it up, you get just minimize that. You get this screen, and you got 3 main tabs here, and there's a reference sheet, and just sort of giving you some information about it. The examples are where it gets really interesting. This wonderful filtered portal here, and could show all, could break it down and just, so oftentimes you can, oh, I'm interested in aggregation, for instance. What's happening here? And then you'll see the examples that just for that area. So one sec. Yeah, I'm gonna come back to this, but let's go up here and take a look at the custom function. Custom function has a nice header on it to help explain some of what's going on. It's obviously the reference sheet out here will have more information than this, but gives you some good information. And then as many of you know, the maximum number of characters that you can have in a custom function definition is 30,000. And he needed more than that. So he built his own minifier, and the code is minified. And I gave this presentation a few months ago in Berlin at .fmp, and I asked Steve at the time, I texted him and said, hey, what was the difference between the minified and the unminified code? And he texted me back, said unminified. So this was on an earlier version, so these numbers wouldn't be exactly this now, but significant gain by minifying. Okay, so let's go into layout mode here. So another thing you have in here is the version history. Browse mode, and it's gone through 109 versions so far. So you can see the unminified source code. See it for yourself or see all the changes, but so very well documented. And another thing is there's close to 700 test cases in here, most of which have actually been completely run. And so if this thing is battle tested in terms of these test cases here, and so I'd point that out. Going back to the examples, let's come back here to this. So we go to examples, and then I'll just start at the beginning. Let's get started. Okay. And what's really nice about this is, well, let's go to one. So the first thing I'll point out is there's actually 2 different screens for the detail on the example. One is for—
I can't hear you. Oh, thank you.
One is
Sorry, I'm in the middle of replying to a shitty email.
Mute, please. One of these is for smaller screens.
Oh, sorry.
And one is for larger screens. And I like the larger screen better, even though I'm not on a large screen at the moment, so I'll just sort of be scrolling sideways. So there are on either of the screens, there's 4 panels. There's the input screen showing you the sample JSON, and oftentimes you can choose a larger amount if you want for testing purposes. I'll keep it small just so that all the examples run super fast. Here we have the JSON query particular syntax for this example. Down here we have some notes, which may or may not, you may want to scroll here. And if you're on this screen, if you were on the other screen, yeah, you'd see more. Okay. And then the result. So the way this would work is you click run example. And so this just came over here and said, find me the records where this ID is 247. And it brought back that entry. Something else I'd like to point out about this is you can reset the example here. And so what that means is you're free to play around with it. Like in this case, say I wanted to get ID 1 instead of, but now I've trashed Steve's demo. So, and fortunately I can reset it. Now, what if I've gone through, changed several examples and forgot? Sometimes I click this and I can't remember which examples I reset. Well, have no fear. Reset all examples. So you can experiment to your heart's content, and you can always get it back to restore status quo. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, come back here. So what you'll see is just an explanation of what there's always 6 arguments, and the first 5 are always the same. Number 6 occasionally changes, and we'll get into that depending on what you're doing. But there's always 6. So after a while, you just sort of get used to that. The first one's always your input. So that one's the easiest of the 6, right? And I'm not going to explain this in detail, but I will say this. In this case, what we're saying is go over here, right? And the name of this field is JSON. That's why that's working, right? That's the key we're looking for. In this case, we want equals. And one of the improvements for those of you who have been using it for a while is we can now put an equals sign instead of the word equals. And what value we're looking for. And this often can be left empty because usually it will figure it out for you correctly. But be aware, there might be times that you might need to specify that. And in this case, result path is because I'm saying I want everything. Oops, I guess I don't have. What did I do wrong? Oh, reset my example. Oh, scroll over here and click run. Okay. And this, of course, would clear that out if I wanted to do that there. So there's plenty of other examples, but there it is in a nutshell there. So what's really nice here is just that this is all so nicely documented. And I use it's almost like an encyclopedia. Go in, find what you're looking for. So if we just move through here, has fashion sense, it's a Boolean. Whoops, I keep doing that. Run the example. And it'll give you some stats. How many records did it return? How long is the result in terms of characters? And how long it took to execute. So generally speaking, how long it will take to execute will depend on a few things. One is what kind of operator you use, and because some are faster than others. But in almost all cases, it's still going to make a lot more sense to do this than to write a while loop to do the equivalent. Once in a while, you might ask the kind of question where you would say, okay, I could have just written the while loop, and in the same amount of time it took me to figure out the JSON query syntax. But often the runtime will be faster, and it will be based on how much it returns, not the size generally, and not the size of the source. So how long you wait typically depends on how many records you're returning. Are there questions so far? I'm not seeing you guys, so I guess one of the moderators will tell me if there are. Okay. All right.
Haven't seen any come across
I got
yet.
one now. Janella?
Hi, I had a couple questions. I was trying to use the JSON query to do a summary of data. And so one of the things I came across was trying to figure out multiple parameters. So if I understand correctly, do I need to so if it's both red and a size of like 6, I need to first search for one and then the other to get a smaller slice, or is there a way to do that?
You know, Steve's here. Steve, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I think that your answer to your own question is actually correct.
Okay.
You can think of, you know, if we use the analogy of doing a find in FileMaker Pro, where you're able to do constraints on multiple fields when you go into find mode. With JSON query, you're not able to do that. Think of it as like find mode, but you can only choose one field that you're going to operate upon.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to make sure that was clear in my head. And then
Totally.
also I was, so for this, we need to update the custom function in our solutions. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to make sure I understood. And then any tips for using large data sets, like 3,000 records is about what I'm kind of dealing with.
It depends on what, Kevin, is it okay if I jump in?
Yes, please.
It depends on what you want to do with them. Can you give me an idea of like maybe like a typical query that you might do with these 3,000 records?
Basically, I'm just trying to get a count of like how many the red and the size 10, how many blue and size 4, like stuff along those lines.
Okay.
And so there's about I think 36 different and doing it through relationships takes a very long time to load. And so I was testing it with this, and it kind of depends also on how big the queries are that I get back. So I have to make them very small.
Okie doke. Well, I'm going to be very candid about this and say that if I had 1,000 records that I wanted to summarize, I wanted to plow through and come up with a result that said there were 14 that were blue and 13 that were 1984 as a date, and so on and so forth. I think, and I knew that, you know, I'm going to summarize the entire data set. I would probably write a while loop instead of use JSON query. Because I personally could get that to go faster than JSON query. And my wish would be that everybody could write a while loop that could get that to go faster than JSON query, because the advantages that JSON query has will not really apply to the case where you need to go through and touch every single piece of data. You start getting the speed benefits when you're hunting and pecking and you're saying, I just want the blue and I just want the yellow. But if eventually at the end of the day, you've gone and you've looked for every record because you've tried all the possibilities, then you're going to, using JSON query will be easier to code probably. But if you're looking for speed, the fastest thing would be to run through your entire set one time in a while loop and then use all of your best wisdom about how to make your calculations run efficiently.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, and I'll play devil's advocate, one of the advantages of using JSON query for it would be to get more comfortable with using JSON query. So, and I will sometimes do that. I'll be like, I'm going to solve this with JSON query because even though I've been using it, if not on a daily basis, certainly many times a week, multiple times a week, and sometimes multiple times a day for close to 3 years now. There's still times I've just absolutely stuck. I go look at some old example. I take screenshots and document a lot of my JSON query that I use so I can come back and find it. I put it in Evernote and then I just search Evernote for JSON query. I come back to this file repeatedly, and what a gift to the FileMaker community. Steve, if you were in the room, we'd all be giving you a standing ovation, in my opinion. So moving on, let's just look at some more examples here. So just in this case, we want to count ones that this is a nice one, right? Because there's several interesting things going on here, right? We want to take a look at Hondas, Hyundais, and Fords for the make, right? And we want to count how many match any of those three, right? And by the way, for anyone, oops, I keep doing that. Okay, one of these days I'll figure that out. 26. one of the things that's changed now, Steve, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot again, before we were limited to 20, is that right, on the in?
Yeah, that's correct.
Is there a limit now?
No, there's not a limit at this with version 2.
Oh, really nice. Okay, so if I just want those two, 24. Okay, there we go. Nice. Okay, so let's see, we can do averages. What's the average auto year? Okay, and maybe at the risk of stating something that's obvious, is JSONQuery is obviously one of the tools in our toolkit, right? So there's nothing to stop us from doing something like that, right? Yeah. And Steve, if you see a specific example, I wrote down a few from our previous conversation that I'm definitely going to show. But if you, I like this one, customize your list delimiter. So in this case, but yeah, if you see something and you want to call it out, please do so. So we're saying cities that are like San, like, by the way, it's also begins with, either of those are the same. So you can use either. Like was the old syntax. And one of the nice things is almost all the improvements in here, if you were used to doing it an old way, the old way works. So we're saying, but here I'm saying, let's do something that begins with San. And we want to make a list, but let's delimit it with commas instead of as a return delimited list, right? So if I took that out, right, we could do that. I'm trying to remember if we have the fun example in here that we had before. Customize the list delimiter. Wait, is that what we? Yeah, this one's fun. Let's do this. So if we run this instead. So what's happening, right, is we've got a string of Unicode characters here. And when we run this, there's we've got a customized delimiter. So yeah, let's jump up here. We've got wildcards, right? Result paths with arrays. And we come over here. So let's see what the output is first. Return element at the specific index of the array. So we got a children at 0 where the ID was less than 10. Yeah, that's what we did. Okay. And wildcard results with aggregation. Let's do it. Okay. Okay, so where the ID is less than 50, let's sum the ages of the children, right? So notice when we use an aggregate, we're not getting back a bunch of results in an array. We're instead just getting back the answer to the question that we asked. And, we haven't looked at list distinct yet. So in this case, right, we've got a number of different pet types in here. And we just like to get a distinct, a unique list of those. So, right, if we didn't say distinct, if we just said list, then we'd have duplicates. Right. So that's pretty nice. And let's output transformation. This is stuff that we haven't talked yet. I had said a little while ago that the 6th argument for JSONQuery could be sometimes something different. And what that can be is a map. And if any of you ever used a map in version 1, you know that it could be kind of gnarly. And actually, I think I'm going to show that right now, what the difference is, because this is a really significant upgrade in terms of usability. And so I was going to show this a little bit later, but I'm going to show it now instead. So this was a real world example of where I used JSONQuery. And actually, let's go to the next slide. I'm going to highlight all the places that I use it like 6 times in this one calculation. So over here, it was version 1. And this is what we had to do back then if we were just embedding it in the middle of our calculation. We had to escape everything. And over here, that's the same syntax under with the new way of handling it in version 2. So you can see much more user-friendly than it was before. Okay, so now I've talked about maps, but what does a map do? What a map does is it allows you to sort of make a report based on your data and just pull out the parts you want and transform them. Like for instance, instead of calling it person.name.first_name, let's just call it first_name. So how does that look? Oh, and now let's point out, this is match all. So we're going to look at everything that's in here in this data set. We're going to bring it all back, but what we're going to bring back is something that's a lot more user-friendly for our needs. Right? So we just grabbed everything in there, ran it through this map, and it's been transformed. And you can do a lot more with maps than just that, but there's a really nice basic use case for a map. And map basics, specify the data type. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so okay, so this is Kate. So we're going to specify an array for this output item and specifying the number there. And here it's going to be an object. So let's still going to do match all, right? But, yeah, and when you think about how much work you'd be doing in some of these cases to do that with a while loop, and instead you just make the map and boom, you're done. It takes a while to get comfortable with it, but once you do, you're really glad to have that in your bag of tricks. And always these notes are worth reading. So let's come back here, and I'm just going to check my outline here and make sure I'm not glossing over something that I want to talk about. No, I think we're good here. Okay. Template. Template would be for cases where you have certain things that you want to always be in the result, right? So let's just run that and see. So basically what we're doing is these two things were not even in the source JSON, but we put them in the template so they become part of the output. It's kind of a cookie cutter.
Kevin, what does a template look like?
Let's take a look. So it's this section here. It's just saying, and you can see it's showing up because we're formatting, right? It's showing up alphabetically by key names. So they're right. It's effectively what we're saying is these two things are going to be in every result entry, right? This data didn't exist over here, but we're adding it. So as an example, I went back to my web scraper and I used template to build him what I wanted him to give me, and I'll show that example in a little while. So, but that's what it's for. I don't use it that often, but it's nice to know that it's there. That's actually coming back to the whole beauty of this thing. Some of these things you may never use, but at some point you may say, wow, wouldn't it be nice if, oh my gosh, there's an example that exactly includes this. So, so as an example here, right, we're using the map here. Well, first off, here's something we haven't seen yet, base path. So base path is sort of like saying, I'm going to do a GTR, I'm going to do a go to related records, and I'm going to go to my children table, and then I'm going to be able to not just show things in that table, but show things from a parent or a grandparent because I have a relational connection. And so the equivalent here is I'm going to start with children, and since I've made that the base path, these fields here are understood to be in that children key. right? It's understood that I'm not talking about this. I don't have to specify children.name because I set the base path. But now here, I'm going to go up a level and also get you something from the auto key, right? Dot, dot, step up a level. And, right? And then push it out like that. So let's see what that looks like. Yep. So, you know, Steve's a musician and a bass player, and he used an example, I think when we did our interview, of etudes, musical etudes. So anyone who's ever studied music seriously has had to grapple with etudes. And the idea behind etudes is that you go through these exercises that may or may not be pleasantly musical. But the trick is to train your fingers to train your brain. And so a lot of these exercises here, it's not necessarily, oh, this is a fascinating example, but it's more like just getting comfortable with using the tool. All right, let's, well, you know what? I'm going to show an example of this, but I like this. Okay, so restructure a JSON object into a JSON array. So this is, sometimes you get wonky JSON. Like this really should be an array, but this person, for whatever reason, chose to make it an object and then give it a unique key. Okay, I guess the technical term for this is associative array. So it really should be an array, but instead they set it up as an object. A lot of times newbies do this. And I mean, I was guilty of it myself when I was first trying to learn JSON, is I really wanted to have key value, and so and use objects. So I was doing this, and I remember a more experienced developer sent me very considerately sent me a note back channel and said, you might want to just make that an array instead. And so here's the deal. We want to turn this into a proper array, because this should just be an array of records, right? So we're going to use the map to do it, right? And let's see. Steve, is there anything you want to say about this?
No, I actually want to jump back to the question about doing summaries, but we can keep that for another day or another time or something like that. But no, the template, I actually don't have a whole lot of call for it myself. And if I were to redo it, I think I wouldn't have a template object, and I'd just piggyback that feature into source and output some way. You know, I'd have a thing where you could supply literal source, and then you could just provide your source your template value as a source attribute, and I think it would actually be kind of elegant. But you know, I went down this path, so we've got template.
Okay, right. Template got used a lot more in version 1. We don't need it as much now. That sound right?
Oh yeah, no, that's true too. And also, I would just say I just don't need it too much. Period. As a feature, it's like a feature that I thought should be there, but it's not one of the ones that I find myself reaching for very often at all.
Okay. Okay. So this is kind of interesting here, right? We've got this key property, right? I'm just going to run the example because, but you see what's happened, right? Is we've taken this and we've transformed it so the email address, which before was just kind of sitting down here innocuously, has become the key for the object. So this again is an associative array effectively. I mean, it's really an object, but it's behaving an awful lot like an array. So that was something we were able to do right there, see? And then on the next example too, right, is worth looking at. Template source. Insert the original array index into the JSON array. So if we run that. There it is. All right, so I'm going to get down to some of the new stuff. We'll skip that. We'll come down here to actually here. New features. Okay, so match all. Now, if you leave it empty, match all will be assumed. So that's a brand new feature, brand new.
Hey, Kevin, before you get too far, there might be a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. How should we handle that? Should I just look at them now? I guess I will.
A couple you might be able to address in there. One about chaining queries in the sample file window.
I would definitely say sure. I mean, why not? Right? Are we talking when we're talking? Could we define, Dean? Do you want to expand on what you mean by that?
Yeah, just picking up on that question from earlier about, I want everything in size 10 and red. Because my understanding of what you said earlier was you'd run JSON query, grab all of the size 10s, you then have a JSON element, and you'd run JSON query against that. I just love to be able to tinker with that in your demo file. I'm not quite sure if that's possible.
What wouldn't you just? If it were me, I'll just say this, right? I'd ask the first question, I'd ask the second question, and then I'd merge the results. Using a JSON merge custom function or a while loop.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I understand the mechanics. It's just for demoing and tinkering and saying, hey, does this work the way I think it should?
Not with a single query. It's not.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Thank you.
But I'm going to interject and say, if it's a question of just, can you do that in the sandbox file? At the end of the day, what you see in sample query is just a calculation that can be evaluated. So you could put cosine of 0 in there and get back a result in it, even though it has nothing to do with JSON query. So you could think of it just like having a data viewer that's sort of bound to these examples, but you could put multiple invocations of JSON query in there if that's what you're looking to do.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a calculation window per se. So I don't know where the result is in that center sample query box, right?
The result's going to show up
Oh,
over whatever you do. Because
right,
it's just
right.
I do want to point out, right? If you're looking at the same field, then we can use contains. Does that look good, Steve? Well, let's find out. What did I do?
Like the sort of topic we're talking about, I think I'd use in if you wanted like
Thank
color
you.
equals yellow or blue or
Yeah, there
green
we go.
or red.
All right. Whoops, still not working. What did I do wrong?
You need a target path. So I think it's like address.state.
Thank you. All right, let's try it. Right, so I just got back. So because it was the same field that I was querying, or the same key that I was querying, right? I can certainly do an OR search in that case in a single statement, right? But it would be different if it was OR street contains Anamark, for instance, right? Then we'd have to find a way to, as you say, chain them and then merge the results back together. Okay. That's a good one, Josh. Good dad joke. Etudes, got it? Yeah, very nice. All right. We're okay. If there's another question, please bring it to my attention. Others, I'm going to move on. So we're looking at the new features. Right. So with the dot, we're saying, give me the whole thing. Right. See, that's what we're saying there. Yeah. Yeah, this is kind of nice. So we just mix the email in with the address. See that? Okay, enough on maps. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this of the omit. That may be, in my opinion, one of the most important additions is that we can now omit. So just kind of like doing an omit constraint in FileMaker or an omit find. Right. So we come over here. Right. Omit the ones that are empty. Right. Steve, you had specifically said 197. Did we do that? We did that one. Yeah. Okay. 254, 255, and 256 are on my list of must shows. So let's go here. We've got the support for the UTC timestamp now. So that's new. Look, we've got the new improved equals operator here. Okay. So we can see the date within the timestamp and intelligently act on it. Right. Right. So it found. So here, so just to be clear, right, we specified just the date portion. It went in, looked in the timestamp, and found the entry. We've got a range. We haven't really talked about ranges, right? When you do a range, you specify the beginning item in the range. Then, in this case, you're using list, right? But the point is, make a return separated comparison value with two entries, the start and the stop. So that's what we're doing there. It's bringing back everything that matched, and yeah. And again, okay, so that was 475 records. Just, we haven't done this yet. Let's use the bigger data set. And let's see. Oh wait, there we go. The example. So it's thinking a little harder there. Okay, took 3 seconds, but and again, it brought back almost half the records. So if I'd, instead made this a smaller range, then that should run faster. Am I right?
Kevin, if you don't mind, I'd like to interject something right around this example.
Okay.
That is, I think one of the things that I would love to have be more transparent for people is when you can expect JSON query to be fast and when you can't expect it to be fast, and how that compares to a while loop. And this touches upon a little bit my comment earlier about doing a summarization. I hope to maybe someday do a video or something that touches upon that and explains it. But the bottom line is that if JSON query has to plow through and look at every element in your input array, then it's not going to be faster than a while loop, because it's going to be doing the same thing that a while loop does, but with additional overhead for validation and interpreting the request that's being presented to it. So in that case, if you have the time to do it, a while loop is a great way to go, and in my case it would be preferable, but understood that sometimes it can get too gnarly if you're have something like, in this case, you have to do some date parsing if you're going to do it as well. But the reason why this example is running slow is because parsing a date is something where JSON query has to look at every single record. It doesn't have any sort of shortcut where it can skip around. With certain data types, JSON query doesn't have to look at every single record. So part of the trick of having the sort of wisdom of when to use it and when not to use it goes one level deeper into understanding when can JSON query do something that shortcuts and works faster than what generally people write when they write a while. And on the other hand, when is it going to have to plow through and look at every single record? Date operations are going to have to look at every single record. Humorously enough, kind of analogous to, like, we all talk about how, well, I'll leave that part out. I was going to make an analogy to like the relationship graph, but we'll get too far into another tangent that way. But date operations, it has to look at every record. Inequality operations has to look at every record. Use of omit has to look at every record. And then I think you were showing a minute ago the list of optimized operators. Those are the ones where you're going to get the speed benefit. So yeah, that's a little bit of sort of more in depth about like how you can start to understand when this is going to be a tool that not only saves you development time, but also makes your queries run faster. And when, on the other hand, it's just going to be something that's like, if you don't like to write these kind of calculations, that's the benefit you're getting out of it.
Or yeah, a lot of time, is this thing going to run every day multiple times? Is it, what's the wait time that you're going to inflict on your users versus, yeah, I just need to run this once, or this runs once a day. And if they have to wait 3 seconds instead of 1 second, it's not the end of the world. Meanwhile, I billed the client, $100 less because I spent way less time writing the code. I'm not quite done showing your examples, Steve, but so I want to carry on with that, and then I'll address that a little bit more about how this has saved me time in the coding. So here we have the in operator, right? And so what are we saying? That the timestamp list one, what are we, well, let's run and see. I'm not quite sure what we're asking here. Are we saying that the month is January?
January, May, or September. Yeah.
Okay, that's really powerful. So that I think the thing is, as you get more comfortable using the tool, you find more places where it can come in handy. I'm going to jump over and show just a few more from here, and then I've got some other examples I want to show. Cutting edge features, matching the paths with the wildcards. Steve, I'd really appreciate it if you would talk a little bit to what's going on here. This is one of the very newest features. Maybe is this a good example?
Sure. If we can back up to maybe back up one record and see what we've got. Yeah. Okay. So what we've got here in this sort of little window of records that you're sitting on in the found set, like, a couple records forward or a couple records backwards, are couplets of examples. The first one sort of sets the context for what the subsequent example tries to illustrate. So this one here is sort of a recap on what the / construct does. The / is all about returning children. So, I think the real common use case for this JSON query is that people have been using it to parse results that they get from the data API, whether it's the script step or the actual API. You're getting just back a bunch of records, but in the case where you have portal data, you've got this sort of related data concept happening where there's an array of related records embedded into each parent object that you're getting back. And we all understand that because we've all been doing this, related data and so on and so forth with FileMaker forever. So no mystery there, but the question is, how do you get at those child records and how do you search on them? And of course, it's analogous to, say, being in a layout and doing the find on a related field, or a field in a portal for that matter. So this query here that we're looking at is an example of doing that analogous, I'm going to do a find in a related field type of thing. So allergy concerns is an array. It's a child array that belongs to every element in the set. Or I left it out in some cases just to be able to illustrate what happens when it's not there. But there you can see. Thank you, Kevin. Child array. And we want to search on that child array data and find, in this case, we want to find those allergy concern records that meet a particular constraint. And it looks like I'm looking for allergy concern records where the description contains the word wheat. So if we run that, you can see the result on the right is it's pulled out all of those portal records, if you will, if we're going to continue with the analogy of the data API, or all those child records, if you want to think of it just in relational terms, and it's collected them into a single array. So that right there is something that I think, we can all code, but typically if you're going to code something like that, you're probably going to use a nested while to sort of go through the parent elements and then spin through the child elements. Or you can probably be a little tricky and not have to do a nested while, but one way or the other, you have to think along those lines. So I think the reason I put this feature in there is just to give people an easy way to grab that. Now, if we look at those records and then we move to the next query, and as Kevin moves back and forth between the records, just see that the only thing that's changing between the example is in the previous record, we've got / and in the subsequent record, we've got /. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is what happens when you use / versus /. And the synopsis of the explanation that I've got down there is / is returning those same related records, or those same child records. Kevin, could you go back just for a second to the previous one? Thank you. So we've got these 3 records that we pulled out. And what I'm saying is that in the next record, we're still getting those three records, those three child records. But the difference is that they're now being returned within the context of their parents. So if we were to inspect the result and go through it methodically, we'd find that those elements returned in the results are the parent elements that contain those three records found in the previous example. And as you look at their allergy concerns arrays, you'll notice that those allergy concern arrays have been filtered down to just those child records that turned out to be a match. And the other ones, sugar allergy or whatever else I put in there, have been removed. So
As an
once
example. Yeah.
excellent, thank you. Once you have a handle on, once you have an understanding of how to use and what the / operator does, then it's a pretty small step to understand what the / operator does. I think the harder leap is actually just understanding what the /1 is doing in the first place. But once you've got that, it's basically / is returning you the same elements, they're child elements that you've matched upon, but it's returning them within context. It's not yanking them out of the parent records as the / does.
Cool. Was there more you wanted to say, or should we move on?
Oh no, that's it. I think that's actually probably the hardest topic to sort of grasp out of JSONQuery. The notation is a little bit cryptic, and unless you've got a great eye for detail and a lot of time, it's hard to
Well, at least there's a lot of
get
examples.
that. Yeah, no, the information is there. It's just I think it's one of the tougher ones to grasp.
Okay. So I'm gonna run out of time if I don't move fast here. So I'll just say this, right? You added a special section just on working with the data API. So there's a lot of information in here about specifically using JSONQuery with the data API. And I think I'll leave it at that. There's some of the things I've glossed over here, Steve, I'm going to show in my sandbox examples, because I know there's some really important stuff in here that I haven't shown yet. So FYI. Okay. Oh, you know what? Yeah. There is one other thing I want to show first. So I showed this a moment ago, and actually before I even do that, I'm gonna show a simpler one. Right. Here's an example of where I use JSONQuery 4 times. This is real code. And that's why I'm not showing the result. This was actually from a client project. And again, it's not about the details of it, as just to say that this would have been considerably more complex if I hadn't been able to use JSONQuery to get little chunks of information for me this way. So, the same is true on this one also. So like, to me, it absolutely is a shorthand way to get where I'm trying to go quicker when I've already got a major headache on my hands just writing this thing. And at least then I'm able to hand off a chunk of the work to, it's almost like I have an assistant, and I can say, hey, could you take care of this piece and bring me back the answer, so I don't have to deal with that, and I'll just move on and deal with other things. So take that for whatever that's worth. It's funny, as I look at this, I'm like immediately going, equals, we can put an equals sign there now instead of having to type that out, right? Or match all, we can leave that empty now and it'll figure out that we want to match all. So I can already see, because this was done in version 1. So yeah, so that's what I want to say about that. So I do have some other examples here, and if we run out of time, I'll just stop showing them. But I want to talk about transforming JSON some more, because that's just something I end up having to do a lot. It comes in one way and I have to do something with it off, and sometimes I have to pass transform JSON off to another service. And so really my job is just to transform it and pass it along. So in this case, well, let's just look at the result, right? So in this case, we wanted to sort of simplify this and bring it into a more sort of standard array of objects format. Use the map for that. These are somewhat similar examples. This just had an extra layer of brackets that it didn't need. So we're simplifying that down there. in this case, I wanted to produce this from this. So, yeah. This is kind of, okay, so here we've got a range. We're gonna do a range search, right? And I'm saying, reach into my options here and find me things where the price is in the range between 40 and 60. Okay. And while you're at it, transform it and make it look the way I want it to look. In this case, do the opposite, right? The two identical queries here, but in one case, I'm saying, give me everything that doesn't match that criteria. Find options with the specified range, turn this as object. Let's see. Right. So just another way that we might transform this. Yeah, so just another transformation of it. Notice in the one case we've got an object. This is again an associative array because this is effectively behaving like an array, even though it isn't. And here we are there. Oh, I didn't put any note on that. What am I doing? Well, whatever it is, it's taking its time. Ah, okay. So this is something we haven't talked about. I can actually, so when we have the source and the output, both with dots, we're saying start from everything. So rather than making me specify everything, the default is show me everything. And now I'll tell you below what I want to do to change it. So the first thing I did here was I said, change the word address to location, or give me address as location. And then I don't even want to see the actual address anymore, even though you're starting with everything, right? So since I'm starting with everything, and what I mean by that is these 4 key value pairs, I'm going to take out address. I've already got it as location. I don't need to see it again as address. Take out the phone, take out the URL. So this delete true is new. We didn't have that before on the map. So then just simplified output. Identify entries without the phone. Okay. So I had some notes about what is empty means. I wonder if I can pull those out. Yeah. So Steve, you'll correct me if I got this wrong, but is empty means the target path is quote, quote, or the target path is null, JSON, you know what, NULL, the null, or the target path is an empty object, or the target path is an empty array. So it's really nice and flexible in that way, right? That it means those 4 different things. So as an example, so I've got Hilton Mines, right? And if I were to change that to be, say, an empty object and click refresh, it would still come up, right? It found it, it brought it back, you know, or if I set that to null. Yeah, so nice and flexible on the is empty. Oh, this is kind of fun. Okay, so not all options are in US dollars. Sometimes they're in other currencies, right? I want a distinct list my option currencies. I got the Egyptian, the USD, the Euro, and the British pound. I want to bring back the path of the entries where they're giving us 10 or more. We have 10 or more in the dinner. And there we are. We can certainly see that one right there is matching the 2, right? Let's see, what are we doing here? Transform the input, add a standard set of template. So Lynn, when you had asked about template earlier, this is an example where I was able to go back to my web scraper and say, this is what I want. Here's your model. Give me that populated. So I specifically actually used template, I used it in a real world case. So.
Thanks, that clarifies things.
Yeah, so, okay, so here's a case where most of the input that I got was useless. So they're like, okay, here's your scrape. And I'm like, this is garbage. This is garbage. Okay, so, but is there anything I can salvage from this? Right? Yeah, the ones where country is non-empty are legit. So I was able to quickly at least say, well, you know, what can I use from here? Oh, 4 entries. Okay. 3, 4. Okay. 5. Yeah. So yeah. By the way, I have a lot of JSON custom functions on my on FileMaker Hacks, and one that I use a lot is this. It's very easy to do this in other ways, but it's faster for me to do this. Yeah. So take that back out since that doesn't really belong there, and I don't have a reset button on mine. Okay. Oh, it's funny. When Steve and I presented 2.5 years ago for FMDiSC, this is in the you know, the movie that you can find on YouTube about it. I gave this example, but now I'm solving this example in a different way. This is the same challenge, different approach to fixing it, right? So what happened here was I've got this list of countries from restcountries.com, and I want to find countries that border Russia. Okay. Now, the problem is as amazing as JSONQuery is, it doesn't do everything that you might ever want it to do. And so we can't do a simple wildcard search on an array. So, and I'm not saying that's a criticism. I'm just saying that that's something I'm going to have to be a little more creative if I want to do it. So what I decided to do was convert the borders array to a space delimited list and then do a contains search. So this is going to be a pizza cutter example, right? So here's idea number 1. Right, and so it's taking a second to draw. So what I've done is I've just transformed this so that what was an array is now a space delimited list. And now that I've done that, we can go to the next example. So that now is, a lot of times I'll use the word slice when I'm pizza slicing. So that's now that's the let variable called slice, and that's what we just looked at. And now I'm going to come back and do a second pass with JSONQuery and take that as my input, right? So now I can just use contains, right? And sure enough, here are the countries that border Russia, okay? Okay, distinctify a list, 1 of 2, so let's see. So what we've got here is I've returned the language array. Right. I've returned all my languages. Obviously, a country might have more than one language, so we have an array, right? And I've returned that object flattened into a list here. But now I want to distinctify, right? I don't need to see it repeated over and over again. Right? So I'm going to use list distinct. And now I've got it deduplicated and also to sort values on that. In this case, I'm going to start from a list, but I want to get an array. I want an array. So I'm going to use JSON make array, which is new in FileMaker 21. And I'm going to tell it object is what you're looking at, right? Because so what we have here is a list of objects. This isn't JSON, right? I mean, not in the standard definition of the term. It's a list of individual JSON objects, but it is not JSON in the sense that, you know, if we pointed a JSON function at this, it would balk. So I'm going to turn this into an array so it becomes back to being proper JSON again. So I'm going to use JSON make array, and I'm telling it, which when JSON make array, you hand it a list, okay? And you can specify the separator, but in this case, I'm going to take the default of hard return, and I'm telling it, hey, here are objects. Turn them in, make an array of objects. Okay, so it's going to do that. That's part 1. Okay, so but it's not sorted, so I wanted it sorted. So we can use sort values. But there's just one little problem, and if you use JSON make array, you'll run into this. right? Which is down here at the bottom. It took that trailing return that sort values helpfully added, and it said, okay, you said that every entry in the list was an object, right? So, and JSON raw is not going to fix this for us, right? JSON raw will just, which by the way, every time you think you're going to get away with something using JSON raw, it will eventually come back to haunt you. So I have a rule of thumb. There are those that have already been bitten by using JSON raw, and there are those who will get bitten using JSON raw. But you can get away with it for a while. Okay, so then all it did was it said, oh, okay, I figured it out for you. In this case, it got it right. And it said that empty return, raw, it's nothing, but it still put quote, quote, right? So that didn't really help us. So what we're going to do instead is use another new feature of, well, this is the new feature. We're going to come down here. That argument means last element in the array is what that means. So basically I'm saying, go ahead and put that empty object there, but I'm going to kill the final element because I know it's there, right? So that's what I'm doing there. So now I've used JSON make array. I turned my list of objects into a valid two-dimensional array, or no, into a valid array of objects. And we no longer have that dangling guy hanging out there, but it is correctly sorted. Okay, so that's that. A few more examples. I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to move quick here. Flatten out the array here. This is unflattened, right? So we just pulled the meals out and made an array of meals. Okay, so this is a plug for a custom function I wrote, format 2D. When I'm working with data, a lot of times I want to see it like that instead of like that. And I especially hate it when FileMaker does half of it horizontal and does the other half vertical because of some obscure length logic that I haven't figured out yet. So that was just a custom function I wrote because of my OCD. And then challenge, generate an array of entries ending in a val. And we're almost through my examples here. So
Kevin, if you need a few extra minutes, you'll be fine.
oh, thanks. I think maybe for Q&A if there are any.
Okay.
So thank you, Bob. So here we go, right? I basically said list all the countries, but we're going to use this as a sort of pizza cutter example, right? Here's the list of all the countries. Now that we've got that, I'm going to make a little while loop, right? And I'm only using JSONQuery once. Okay, so, but yeah, so JSONQuery is going to feed my input here with what we saw in the previous example, right? Old way, right? And it's the old way because I had to keep track. As I built up this array of where the next position was, right? So I had to maintain that index. That's the old way. New way, slightly simpler. I don't need to maintain that index. And the reason I don't need to is because I can use the plus operator and just pop each entry on to the end of this array that I'm building up. So same result, right? And remember what the challenge was, find entries ending in a val. So that's what I did there. Let me just look at my notes and see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I was just going to real quick, and this will be the final thing I show. I wanted to show another place where I used JSONQuery kind of out in the real world. So, I mean, it's not really the real world. I made this was a blog posting I did back in May. I'm using on window transaction, but like where the rest of the world is using it to make audit logs, I decided to do something different with it, which was that it's a really common thing for people to make a JSON representation of a record. So in this case, I want a JSON representation for each of my customers, but not just of their customer data, also of all their invoices, all the line items on those invoices. So kind of a complete customer info plus order history. So I used on window transaction just to build that JSON, and one of the advantages is way faster because if you have to build that JSON, Jeremy, do you want to talk now? I saw your hand. All right, well, let's save it for after. So so one of the things that happened here was you can use it on window transaction and build the JSON. And if you're hosted, you can do it server side. So that's really
Oh.
nice. Pass it off. And then the advantage being is when somebody says something like, yeah, I might as well show what problem I'm solving, right? If somebody says, hey, give me all my JSON for like this whole found set of customers, plus all their invoices with all their line items on their invoices, right? Then I can just come over here and I ran a, hang on one sec. Yeah, I just loaded up that variable, right? And there it all is, right? And it's a lot of it, right? And it was very fast. And the reason it was fast is because I'm storing the JSON here in this table and just updating it as necessary. And so I can very quickly pull that up because it's all stored. So one thing is, to handle one obscure edge case, I needed to know all the primary keys from all 4 of the tables and have them in one place. So the definition of that is key list. And here I am just stacking it up with JSONQuery, right? I mean, it wasn't hard for me to get my key of my customer, but the other 3. I grabbed all the primary keys that way. And then the other places in the scripts that produce this, I have, let me get my data viewer off the screen. So one of the scripts is on window transaction that fires whenever I edit the data. So it uses JSONQuery as part of its mojo. And then when I'm updating the JSON inside the JSON table, I call it 3 times. So just case of like really using it out in the real world as opposed to demoing something hypothetical. So that's what I've got. I am going to put the slide back up on the screen so you can see Steve's GitHub, and ready for any questions if anyone has them. Okay. Well, then on that happy note, I think we're done.
So I just want to say, I think this is really fantastic. And Steve, I agree with Kevin that you've done a big service to the developer community with all this hard work. Very much appreciated, I'm sure, by everyone here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I can't think of any greater compliment to Steve than would be is if a year from now there are hundreds of people using this and making his life living hell by pestering him constantly with questions. Because you know, it's a snowball and it's starting to roll down the mountain, and I think a year from now it's going to be huge.
Yeah, well, it's great. It's really great. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a little slice of heaven, guys.
Awesome. Well, it's good to see you here, and thanks again. Okay, next up we have Mr. Chris Moyer, who I am now giving permission to share. And Chris is going to give us his monthly installment of the Tech News Roundup, which is always very entertaining. And here we go.
All right, can you guys see okay?
Yes.
It's good.
Excellent. Okay, welcome to the September edition of the Tech News Roundup. I am going to, let me hide my thumbnail here. Start off with Apple Intelligence. This was announced at the Worldwide Developer Conference this past summer. And then just this past week, they announced the new iPhones and iPads.
What's going on here, period. I'm just reporting on the data as I see it, period. Do you want to look at it together, question mark?
Who's talking?
Kevin
Okay.
and several others need
Oh.
to meet.
Okay, yes. Could anyone who needs to have side conversations, please mute their microphone. Anyway, regarding Apple Intelligence. So it's interesting. Usually Apple has really good backwards compatibility, at least with a couple versions on earlier devices when they introduce a new technology like this. But that is not the case with Apple Intelligence. So obviously it's gonna work on the iPhone 16. But it has limited backwards compatibility to the earlier versions. So if you got an iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max, then Apple Intelligence will run on that. But anything else in terms of older gear is not going to be able to run this stuff. So AI will be rolling out next month, starting with iOS 18.1, iPad OS 18.1, and Mac OS Sequoia 15.1. It's not going to be sort of a gestalt of a rollout. Apple Intelligence will come, and then some additional Apple Intelligence features will sort of trickle out in the following months from that. But the chip hardware, the iOS devices need to have are either the new A18 chips or the A17 chips, which is what was inside the iPhone 15 Pro and the Pro Max. Oops, there we go. Okay, last month we talked about a couple of people leaving OpenAI and what that all sort of meant. And I wanted to draw attention to the two guys who left, one of which was John Schulman and the other of which was Ilya Sutskever. They were both involved in the sort of guardrail end of the company where they were looking at AI safety and things like that. And, there was a lot of wondering aloud in the community of like, well, if no one's going to be making sure that OpenAI's stuff is safe, what are the practical implications of that and what's going to happen? And we got something of an answer now. There's this whole long, complicated process, but basically, NIST has a department called US AI Safety Institute, and they signed written agreements with OpenAI and Anthropic to basically become the testing agency for those organizations. And, maybe that's the first domino to fall, and they'll be doing it for any US AI company. There are other AI companies, Mistral in France, and I can't forget the one in Germany that just had a pivot because they were getting outgunned in the training cluster space. But the bulk of AI companies are US based. And so by NIST becoming the de facto testing organization for all of these, that sort of does a couple things. It sort of takes the burden of, the testing staff and compute power required to watchdog these things off of the private company's plates and puts it onto the taxpayers' bill, which is sort of interesting. But they're pre-flighting all this stuff before they release it. OpenAI was just showing Strawberry, which is their synthetic data trainer technology, to the US intelligence and defense communities before they publicly release this stuff. So US intelligence and defense, in this form of the AI Safety Institute, has now become the gatekeeper for AI. I mean, they're treating it like weapons grade technology because it is potentially weapons grade technology. And it's being regulated like a defense sort of asset, which is interesting stuff. It's sort of a wrinkle. This just happened at the end of August, so this agreement isn't even 2 weeks old yet. But interesting nonetheless. Also in the news in the world of AI is Cursor AI. This is a fork of VS Code for those of you who are VS Code users. It's pretty cool. There's a fun video out there about an 8-year-old girl who built a Harry Potter chatbot with it. And it's all just, I want something that does this, and it'll throw some code up there, and she clicks apply, accept, and then she runs it, and then she's like, well, that's cool, but, center this or make it do that. And it's like a, I don't know, 10, 20-minute video. And in that amount of time, just by using English language prompts, it's generating all this code for her. And at the end, she's got herself a Harry Potter chatbot. It's pretty cool. You should check it out. And you could just go onto YouTube and search for Harry Potter chatbot 8-year-old girl Cursor, and that will definitely find it. Cursor has a free tier for those of you interested in checking something like this out. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there about how to get started on it. Definitely worth checking out. But I mean, the upshot of it is you don't even need to know how to code anymore to code apps. So talk about low code developers. This is like no code developers. It's really just describing what you want in plain English and it will write the code for you. And then sort of similar to that.
Hello.
Here's a sample of the video.
Today. Oh, wow.
We just sort of run through it. So this is how she does it. She types what she wants. It will come up with some code.
Basically have some code. And I will apply it. I'm going to do command tab.
And it pops it in there. And she just sort of iterates this like 20 times. And at the end of the process, she's got this, you know, fairly elaborate thing that's pretty cool. So chat with Harry. So anyway, kind of a neat thing worth having a look if you want to feel completely obsolete. And then Chris Hippolyte posted this thing on LinkedIn, which is kind of fun. So he wanted to write a restaurant bill splitting app. So he's just describing what he wants in plain English. And there's his LinkedIn link there. And there you go, a bill splitting app. Pretty cool. Also in the same vein as this is an announcement from Google. They cooked up something that they have dubbed Game Engine, as you can see in the abstract here. And they have, Google has their own custom AI chips. They call them TPUs. They're not the same as GPUs. Google's the only one that has them. They make them. They can sell you the use of them in a cloud service. But basically running on a single TPU, they were able to replicate the functionality of the single-person shoot or first-person shooter game Doom at 20 frames per second on the fly. So it's actually creating each of these frames in real time as you sort of move through this, which is pretty wild. There's a video out there if you want to check it out. But now you don't even need to write games. I mean, we're moving to the point where AI you can say, I want to play a game where I tame unicorns and fly to Mars or something like that. And it will make you a game like that. And you can play it in real time without ever having to generate scenery or any of this stuff. So these diffusion models that can generate graphics and video and so forth, sound, are getting so good that game developers are going to be out of a job one of these days. Let's see. Also in the AI news beat, Elon Musk made a tweet on September 2nd that said that they have created an AI training cluster that they've dubbed Colossus with 100,000 H100 GPUs. And these usually, something on this scale would typically take like a year to stand up. And he said it was done in 122 days. And he's also made the claim that this is the most powerful AI training system in the world. However, there has been some subsequent reporting on this that says they don't, this thing was built out in Memphis, Tennessee, and they have 100,000 GPUs. And they, until August, had only just a few megawatts of power. Starting at the beginning of August, they got 50 megawatts of power. And data cluster developers have told the Information online news source that 50 megawatts could only power a few thousand of these GPUs, and that they would need a complete other electric substation to run all 100,000. So it sounds like a bit of an overstatement that Colossus is truly a 100K GPU training cluster at this point, because they don't have the juice to run all those things. So that's interesting. Moving out of the AI segment, Apple has, I don't know, for those of you old timers, you probably remember that Apple used to, pretty much run their European business out of Ireland. And they had like a sweetheart tax treatment deal with the country of Ireland, where they had very favorable tax terms. And since, God, I want to say 6 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, the EU has been fighting with Apple and Ireland, saying you can't do that, that there are EU regulations that trump this. And they've been going back and forth. Apple won an appeal, and then it finally came up to the top court in the EU, and Apple lost. And so there was a $2.4 billion antitrust fine with interest and everything. The total bill is $13 billion in back taxes. Apple continues to be defiant, but I don't see how they're going to win this one. Should be interesting. The European Court of Justice said on Tuesday in its final ruling that it confirms the EU Commission's 2016 division, Ireland granted Apple unlawful aid, which Ireland is required to recover. So, I mean, they're basically forcing Ireland, here, take this $13 billion or euros that's been sitting in escrow this entire time. So, bummer for Apple, but I think they can afford it. Moving on to cryptography. So there has been, with all the splashiness of the AI news, it's sort of hard to hear some of the stuff that's going on in other technology areas. But one of them is that quantum computing is getting better. It's certainly doubled from last year to this year, and I think doubled the year before that. So as these things are ramping up, technology companies have been seeing the writing on the wall, saying, these things are probably going to be good enough in maybe 5 to 10 years that our current grade of cryptography that we use throughout the whole technology ecosystem is going to be toast. And so last week, Microsoft released some updates to a library called SymCrypt, which is a cryptographic code library for handling functions in Windows and Linux. The library has been around since 2006. And despite the name, it supports symmetric and asymmetric algorithms. And it's the main cryptographic library that Microsoft uses in all their products and services: Azure, Microsoft 365, all supported versions of Windows, and Azure Linux. Used in email, cloud storage, web browsing, remote access, device management. It'll be bad if it goes down. So Microsoft is trying to get ahead of this, and they've updated 2 of the libraries inside of it, and more are coming. So it's good to see that they've, seen the threat early enough and seem to be acting accordingly. But I'll bet a lot of people miss this one because it was pretty low on the radar. This is from Alert Tech News correspondent Bob Shockey. He sent this one over about it's basically a text scam saying, hey, the Postal Service has a package for you and you need to pay some duties on it, or whatever the situation may be. And this guy is a security researcher, and he actually did something which is legally gray, I guess I would call it. And this is known as hacking back. So his name was Grant Smith. He received this text message claiming to be from the Postal Service, and he dismissed it. However, his wife also got that text message and did not, and put in her credit card credentials. So he went after them. He managed to crack their website, got their admin passwords. Their credentials were admin and 123456, just for your own information. He was able to extract all the victim data from the network of smishing websites. He got a data cache of 438,669 credit card numbers and 1.2 million pieces of information from 1,133 domains. And then he was sort of blogging about this, and one of the banks involved got wind of this and asked him for his data, and they looped the FBI in. And because this is a gray area under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, due to him hacking into the scammer systems to gather the evidence is a violation itself of the CFAA. And so they're not going to prosecute him, but the authorities are concerned that the evidence collected is now inadmissible in court because he obtained it through technically illegal means. So sort of a good news, bad news, not quite so feel good story there, but interesting nonetheless. I thought this was an interesting one. You know, we went to San Francisco. Heidi and I went to San Francisco recently and saw the Waymos driving around, and they're sort of weird looking. You see these cars with no drivers in them. And I poked a little fun at them a month or two ago where steam was coming out of a grate and the Waymo was stopping at the steam plume because it didn't want to run it over. And apparently they just released some accident data, and there's a story here in the blurb where some person was running from the cops and trashed a bunch of cars and then crashed into a Waymo and also hit 2 pedestrians, but Waymo had to report this as a pedestrian injury accident involving its car, even though it was the one that got hit. So Waymos have gone over 22 million miles and only been involved in 22 crashes. So, and 1 injury causing crash for every million miles, which is way less than we do as humans. So I think I have the stat somewhere. No, I can't find my stat. But I just thought it was interesting. I, you know, wanted to give Waymo their flowers because I've been giving them a little grief about them stopping at steam plumes. And I thought this was fun too. I thought Josh Orman might want to do this. That if you go onto Alibaba, you can buy your very own diamond making machine for only 200 grand. Apparently, there are 2 different kinds of diamond making machines. One called HPHT, which is sort of crush the, you know, put it under incredible heat and pressure process. And there's another one with chemical vapor disposition, which you can also buy, but which is more expensive at 450K. These things are not small. That's what one of them looks like, and this is what they look like in real life. So if you have room in your basement for one of these, you can make your own diamonds for 200K. You need a ton of power. You would also need a reliable source of high-quality graphite, metal catalysts like iron or cobalt, precise temperature and pressure control systems, and a steady supply of methane and hydrogen gases. As well as the ability to control microwaves or hot filaments. But if you've got all that stuff, you too can make diamonds in your basement. So I thought that was a fun bit of tech news. And then it's been a while since I ran through the scheduled events going on around the world, because there's a ton of them going on around the world. Reconnect Brisbane just happened on the 5th and 6th. I know some folks from the US and Canada went there, including possibly some people who are on this meetup. Let's see. There's a German language one on October 2nd through 4th. There's the Paz FileMaker Summer Camp, or Fall Camp as the case may be, on October 7th through 10th. Rome FileMaker Week, which is now English language. It used to be Italian, is now also October 7th, but going through the 13th. Engage You happens in November 17th through 19th in Malmo, Sweden. And then Vienna Calling, which is the conference that is the successor to .fmp, which was held in Berlin, is now going to be held in Vienna, Austria. And that'll be happening next June. And early June was always the time that the .fmp conference was held. And that is all I've got for tech news.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Always enjoy those. And if anybody has things that they want to bring to Chris's attention, like I did with that one story, I know he appreciates getting those because there's a lot of news, as he and I were commenting. There's just a ton going on in the tech news world. So you know, things are going to slip past even your most intrepid reporter. So please do help out if you come across anything that you think the group would find interesting. All right. All right, everyone, welcome back. We're now at the last and the last session for today, which is with Chris Jackson, who I am now going to make. Chris, I'm going to set you up to be able to share. And yeah, so Chris is going to be talking, Chris from Angel City Data, and he's going to be talking about a multilingual database solution. So take it away, Chris.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to share with you today a really easy way to make your database multilingual. So we had already started building this database, and we got a request from the client who has an office in Paris to enable the Paris staff to see and operate their database in their native language. So at first, I was a little bit intimidated perhaps by that. I'm like, how are we going to do this? Turned out to be very easy to implement, and thought we'd share that with you. So, and just a clarification, this translation isn't translating content in fields. It's merely translating field labels, tabs, tooltips, things of that nature. You can do custom dialogues, basically anywhere where you can do a calculation, you can do a translation. It's super easy, takes a little bit of organization, and performance regarding most things is great. If you've been working with FileMaker for a long time, you may have tried to do this yourself back in the day before global variables were a thing, and found it to be cumbersome and problematic. But global variables are your friend in most cases. So I have a switch language here. All I got to do is switch language. Right now, the system's just handling French and English. But there's nothing stopping you from doing as many languages as you want. So if you got 5 countries you're deploying your solution in, and you want to do German or Spanish translation, not a problem. And I'll show you the back end how it works. All you need is another column for that translation. And then you do need a user table to track your users. So whether you're using FileMaker security or your own kind of wrapped security around that, you do at least need a user table so you can recognize users and store preference for that user as to what language they would prefer. So as you can see, I'm switching back and forth between French and English, and it takes, a second or less. And most of the time upon login, you run this script that loads in your global variables with all your translations. And then that's all that's needed throughout that user's session. So I'm going to show you the configuration area. Basically, here I have a table of 700, a little over 700 field labels, essentially. This includes tooltips. It can also include custom dialogues. We haven't yet put in custom dialogues, but we will be doing that shortly. As I said, this is still in development. So we have our variable name, our English, translation. What we wanted to say is you would typically see it in English, and the French translation. We did hire a translator, and I highly recommend hiring a translator. You can use Google Translate. However, with certain technical concepts or a longer sentence, Google Translate isn't perfect. So having a natural language speaker of that, whatever you're translating into, I highly recommend, just to make sure contextually the translation makes sense. But I did some simple things, words, easy to do, Google Translate, pretty basic. So all I have upon login, this goes to this table, decides whether you're an English speaker or French speaker, and creates variables for every one of the fields. And I'll show that to you. If you look on our data viewer, we can see all 700. variables here for every single field in the system that we want translated. Now, it's super easy with this interface. You put it in here. I hit copy. So if you go to layout mode, you can just hit paste and you get your merge variable, global merge variable right there, all set to use. Makes it pretty quick and easy to maintain. There are a couple important considerations. First, from a performance perspective, once those variables are loaded, it should be really fast because it's already in the variables are stored in RAM, right? So it's not reading from the server or anything. I don't know what the theoretical limits are. Maybe performance would get slow loading those things at some thousands of variables. This is I would say, a moderately sized system. And it's amazing how many times you're reusing these. So, go to next or delete or create or add or duplicate or print is a common word that gets put on lots of buttons, done, right? So there's efficiency there. The more you use it, the more efficient it becomes. The one thing, the biggest thing to watch out for is the length of the text. So go to next record, or depending what you want it to say. French is a fair bit more verbose in some cases to English, so you want to watch out for your field label length, and you can get into trouble there. Another reason, I'm not a French speaker, so I know very little French. If I'm looking at a field label, I may not realize that a word is getting cut off. In that case, it's helpful to have a translator to kind of help review all your layouts and forms reports to make sure that stuff is reading correctly. That would be a word of advice. The one thing is a kind of a gotcha that is a little bit annoying. So the data viewer is not, I don't know if it's just the way it's programmed or the nature of it, where it's having to reevaluate calculations on screen refreshes or what have you. But loading 700 variables into the data viewer makes the data viewer as a whole somewhat slow to respond. So if you're using script debugger to debug a script with the data viewer open, which is very common, you may find that it's slowing down script debugger from step to step, and it's just the nature of the data viewer having so many variables that are loaded. I would recommend you create a script to unload just your translation variables. Of course, when you do that, all your labels will go blank, but it will bring the normal speed of the debugger back. And then you can reload those anytime you want. Even if you have your watch tab open and you're debugging, I still find that having those variables loaded slows down the performance. I haven't tried to load thousands or multiple thousands to see if it gets worse. I suspect it probably would, but that's just something you're going to have to deal with during development. Your end users, if they're not using the data viewer, aren't going to have any performance issues at all. Another aspect is you're going to want to obviously watch out for duplicate variable names, and obviously easy to build in your French. I don't know my French. In your translation table, you're going to build in a duplication detection. So if you duplicate a variable, have that catch for you. Now, I did discover accidentally some of my system variables, which are not in this translations table. I inadvertently created translation for something I'm going to use. It's rare, but like first name, if you use a system variable that's $, first name for some reason, and you also want that to be on a layout, you just got to make sure to either include, if you want, I didn't want to put my system variables in here. I'd already basically, the system was nearly built when we got the task of creating this translation. So I don't have system variables in here. You could put them in here. You could also come up with a naming convention that might assist you with preventing accidental duplication of those. The other difficult thing is your system variables or script variables, are going to be mixed in with this list if they're global. And so finding them is difficult. Again, if you were to come up with a convention, I don't know, put a Z in front of them, they'd be at the very bottom of the list or something like that. Then that may help you out. At present, I haven't done that, but that could really assist you. So question is, do you find labels getting clipped between platforms? Yes, right? So Mac and Windows, or if you have a mobile component to this, things do get displayed in an ever so slightly different way. You definitely got to check all your forms before going live with it to make sure that your field labels work, are fully displayed. Custom menus, yes, you can do custom menus as well. You can translate those. Tooltips translate basically anywhere where the calculation engine is available. You can do translations for that.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, fire away.
Since this was a late entering requirement, would you have done anything differently, and what would that be if you'd known earlier in the design process that this was going to be a requirement?
Yeah, I think honestly, I would have come up with a naming convention for my global system variables, which there are not a lot of, but would assist in when you're looking at the data viewer, trying to see your system variables, have them in somewhere that make them easy to find. That's something I would do. Any other questions? Stephen says, do you use hide logic in tests for platform? Yeah, depending on the function, absolutely. Right now, this system I'm demonstrating is just Mac and Windows. We don't have a mobile component to this, so I haven't reviewed it on that, but you'll notice on some screens we have a larger space between the field label and the field to accommodate the French translation. Some other languages may be even more verbose, so it's just something you'd have to beta test thoroughly. Any other questions?
I think one other, the ability to hide, Chris, one of the things that we've experienced that, again, in the comments I posted, this is accessed both from the West Coast to East Coast and then Europe. I think it's hosted East Coast. So we're kind of halfway between. But when you start getting into one of the things just to be careful of, obviously there's pain points on any decision that you make in terms of scalability and performance and so forth, and especially over wide area networks. But we've found in other systems using a lot of conditional formatting, using a lot of calculation logic for hiding objects. Obviously, we all use those and they're reasonable. When you start using a lot of them, they can really start mounting in terms of performance issues. So we definitely use hide object at times for various things. But when we start getting into layouts that have an enormous amount of complexity to them, it's not that you can't use hide logic, hide when, but you have to be careful about the impact because everything that touches the calc engine impacts the viewing performance for the end user.
Yeah, in terms of translation, we don't need to hide, like, we don't have a set of fields for English and a set of fields for French, and that would be a lot of labor to maintain, or difficult to add a third or fourth or fifth language. In theory, this system could easily handle 20 languages. All you just need is another column for that, but you'd use the same variables. Of course, I'm an English speaker and I'm an English developer, so all of my merge fields are, my field names from a development standpoint are English. If you have a French developer might, be writing all of his in French, so you do have to consider if you have multiple developers on your team, or most of us are going to be developing in English. That's a consideration.
Yeah,
Dean Sir and Lynn Allen have their hands up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just a quick comment, I guess, on your translation table. You mentioned being cut off and so on, and I know that fonts have variable widths, but you could just add a number in there that says, I got space for 30 characters, and have a flag that advises you that your French is lingering on, and flag that. So as opposed to having to check every layout. But I'm kind of curious, because you probably learned this while you're doing your debug, those two columns towards the end that say module and screens.
Yep.
Are you using those, and how has that helped you? What's the purpose there?
Yeah, so I think we have multiple developers working on this, and it has been handy when features get deprecated or modified. And so they're like, oh, client wants this other screen, we can remove this screen and delete it. Being able to understand maybe where these things are being used, or if they're being used in multiple places. And so it's helpful to put some notes in there. Sometimes it's obvious based on the variable name where it's being used. Many times it's not. And keeping things clean, generally we are building stuff. We're not unbuilding stuff, but it does happen. Years go on, oh, we don't need this module anymore. You can remove it. Sometimes, we get lazy. We're just, I'll remove access to the layouts. I'm done. But I'll leave all the infrastructure in place. Liking to write clean and lightweight code. The analyst in me wants to clean up all the things that I don't really need. So if I'm not using this account number field, why should I load it into memory and have it sit there for no reason? So if I know if it's in a certain place or not being used anymore, I should be able to get rid of that. So maintaining a system like this does take a little bit more thought and planning, just to keep it clean and from getting out of hand. Lynn, you had a question. Go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, I just thought I'd bend your brain a little here on Friday afternoon. What if you had a application that used some English and some non-English character sets, like Cyrillic or Kanji or something?
Yeah, I think in that case, I don't know if the Cyrillic translates or not. That's a good question. So if the end user, if this is a multi-user system, and you have to handle both, FileMaker, right, does observe your operating system's location function. So if you're in Great Britain, you may speak English, but there is, the pound symbol, the month day switch on a date field is recognized by FileMaker based on your system default. I'm assuming that like a Cyrillic default would suffice for that.
Chris, overall, this project, obviously, well, I get the impression that, this was the first time that you've attempted a thing like this, or that anyone maybe
in
at
some time
City had.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, typically I find that I think I know what I'm up against with a thing like that. And then I find that it's a lot more complicated than that. Can you talk a little bit about that journey and what the surprises were?
Yeah, I guess I immediately, I did this once before years ago in FileMaker 7 or earlier. So it's been quite some time where, we had a table, but it was, based on a relationship. And of course, we know relationships are slow. So, and FileMaker was slower then and didn't perform as well and wasn't optimized, but still, even then, I would, on a complicated form with lots of screens, I very quickly realized this is going to be a problem if we try and go through a relationship. And so the global variable, I just a lot of unknowns. In all my database history, you have like, I don't know, 20 global variables that sit around. You have a lot of script variables that come and go, local variables or function variables that are just there for the moment. So it's usually not a problem. I think FileMaker says you can have an unlimited number of global variables there, as when they say that, there's always some limit. I haven't tried to load it up with 10,000. It would probably work. It would slow down the data viewer to probably a point of being unusable, I suspect. The biggest gotcha for me or problem was, you went and we built our interface and then we applied the French, and the French language is more verbose in a lot of cases. And we realized a lot of our fields were, the field labels were getting cut off because the layout object was not wide enough, or we had to wrap it to a second row. So that was the biggest gotcha. Is, okay, we got to tweak every layout to make sure people can see it and read it and understand what this field is.
Yeah, I guess that problem would grow with every language you add in too, because different labels are going to have different problems with each language.
Yeah, it typically, this system is being used in, 5 different offices. Most are English speaking. There's hints that another European language is going to be used. I don't know yet what that is. So I don't know, like, if German, I think French and Spanish are probably very close in terms of length. I don't know what if German's longer or not. But yeah, clearly, if you know up front, you're going to have to do a translation, get those languages, do some tests with, even if you just took your field names and had a translator translate them into German and take a look at those lengths of text, you're going to be ahead if you plan all your layouts and forms and reports with that label length in mind.
I suppose it wouldn't be too hard to like get the length on all those and compare them to the English and get an average for, German words are X% longer. That might help you a little bit with design.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Steven says, how about Klingon? I don't know the Klingon language that well. I can speak it. I can't write it, so I can't say. I'm not visually.
I want to just confirm that I have experienced the slowdown in the data viewer. Just keeping a series of like SQL statements in there that I'm working on. I'll work them out in the data viewer, paste them into the field def or the script or whatever, and then just leave them in the data viewer. And if I get more than 7 or 8 of them in there, it does start to slow down the display and the like switching back and forth from current to watch or whatever. So it is perceptible.
Yeah, I would love for some improvements to be made to the data viewer, like, being able to search or filter this list would be amazing. Or when I'm switching to watch, this current tab somehow goes dormant and is not updated, because if you're not seeing it, what's the point? But clearly, even though I'm on this, I'm only looking at a handful of variables. The data viewer is still painfully slow at times.
Well, it seems like an elegant solution to the language translation issue. I think your use of global variables is very smart. And seems like you're getting a great result here.
Yeah,
Very
it
cool.
works pretty well.
Well, thank you, Chris. This is very, very informative. Thank you. All right. Does anybody have any other questions for Chris before we wrap up? All right, great. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you to all of our presenters, and Kevin, other Chris.
Steve.
Thank you all for being here today. And
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Chris. Thanks.
and yes, and Steve
everybody.
too. Yes. Yeah, thanks everyone. And we'll see you all next month.
Great
Bye,
meeting.
folks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.